21 marathons in 21 months, having never run more than a half before I attempted my first, which I failed. I made a lot of running mistakes. I had no coach, no training plan, I had the wrong nutrition, the wrong heart rate zone. But I'm not going to tell you to run a marathon, and I'm not here to tell you how I've learned to become better at running marathons. This isn't really about running at all. Running was just the price I had to pay to learn the lessons that I'd been hearing for years. You don't need to run a single step to get value out of the lessons I'm going to share. It's 3 lessons I already knew the theory of. I'd heard time and time again. It's not new information, you've probably heard them too. But to understand them, for them to be useful, you need to know the origin stories of my 21 marathons in 21 months. So to take it back to where it started, in November of 2024, I had never run more than a half marathon. I had just broken up with my long-term partner, and as a result I had to move house. I was working a job I didn't like. I had a side hustle that was unprofitable. My life was basically all over the place. And it got to the point where the logistics of getting to the gym got difficult. And so I turned to running as an easy alternative. It was a nice dopamine release and just time to be with my thoughts. And one day I set out to run 30 kilometers. And feeling top shit, 20 kilometers in, I thought, let's extend this to a full marathon. And that absolutely blew up in my face. 33 kilometers, I had to call an Uber home, on the brink of an injury. But after that initial frustration passed of the failure of the marathon, I realized I'd been left with something a lot more valuable. I'd given myself some more recent proof that I'm able to get through difficult things, to survive tough times. And given where I was in my life, that was the proof I really needed to take the steps to dig myself out of this. It changed my mindset about tackling difficult things and how I felt about the general circumstances of my life. And so I went looking for more proof and set out to run a marathon. Now, before I ran the 30K, I knew I was going to survive. I knew that everything was going to be fine. But there's a big difference between knowing a lesson and actually learning it. When you learn a lesson, you enact it. It's in reality. Your behavior actually changes, your actions. And so what I realized, there are so many of these lessons that you can know, but they're somewhat unteachable. You have to go out and get the first-hand experience, get the scar, go pay the price to actually learn the lesson and for your behavior to change. And that's the situation me and you are both in. We have the information we need. In this day and age, you can go out and get the knowledge that you need to tackle any goal that you have. The difference is what action you take. That's now what separates us in this day and age where everyone has access to the right information. It's who takes the action, who actually learns the lesson and changes their behavior. Like, I read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, and intellectually I understood the theory and the message behind all the concepts. But until I was 3 hours into a really difficult marathon, I didn't really learn the lesson there. Same can be said to listening to Alex Hormozi podcasts about marketing your business. I understood the theory. Intellectually, I was there, got down the concept. But until I actually had a business and I needed to market it and I went through those steps, I applied that learning, it was all just theory. And it's why the first unteachable lesson that I learned brutally through running marathons is to lead with action. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Your behavior dictates the results that you get. Thinking about doing the thing, reading about doing the thing, talking to people about how you're going to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Nothing is actually changing. All of it is inaction. And inaction just breeds fear. And fear just suppresses your ability to take action. It's this brutal cycle. And that's why leading with action is this unteachable lesson. Because the longer you leave the action that you have to take, the bigger the fear gets, the bigger it grows, and the harder it is to act when you have this giant wall of fear. Now, I'm not talking about the type of fear when you're being attacked by a rabid dog and it's fight or flight. I'm talking about the type of fear that it's you overthinking into the future, the worry, the anxiety, the fear that you might fail, that you might embarrass yourself. It's the fear that stops you from taking action. This is a lesson that I've had plenty of experience with again and again. When I failed that 30-kilometer run, I had kind of given myself an injury, and so I had to take about 6 weeks off before I could try again. And in that 6 weeks, the fear just built and it got harder and harder and scarier to face. The same is true for even starting this channel. This had been an idea for a long time, and I'd talked to people about how I wanted to do it. I'd written down notes in my notes app about videos that I wanted to film, but I just didn't start. And the fear just got bigger and bigger with every day that I had this desire, had this idea, but I didn't take any action towards it. You know it's an action that you eventually have to face. And so all you're doing is letting the fear build this giant wall. And every day it just gets wider and wider, it gets bigger. And then you finally have to take the action, and it's really difficult because you have all this fear. But once you do, you realize that the wall is only an inch deep. All you had to do was take one bit of action and it all just disappears. There's so many times in my life where I can think back and just say that if I just led with action, I would have saved myself so much pain. And the second thing that's also going to save you a lot of pain is realizing that if you have a desire, you're either willing to sacrifice for it or you need to release that desire. Because every goal, every desire you have, it has a fixed set of actions that you have to take, a requirement for what you need to do to get there. That's the price of admission. And the problem is when you have this desire, you want this thing, but you're not willing to make the sacrifices to do it. And the gap between those two things is what causes so much unhappiness and dissatisfaction. When I decided to start running monthly marathons, and that became my goal, the desire that I had, I knew there were going to be a lot of sacrifices. All the time that I was going to have to spend running, all the discomfort of running when you don't feel like it, having to learn to eat while you're running, losing some toenails, risking injuries, and having to say no to going out or hanging out with friends so that I could run. But I was prepared to pay that cost. I was prepared to make those sacrifices to get the outcome. But about 7 months in, I started getting bored. I was running the monthly marathons and I thought, this is getting a little bit easy. Like, it's not challenging me as much as it was for the first few. So maybe I'll run a little bit more. And so I ran a 50K and then I ran a 75K. And part of me wanted to keep running longer, further distances. And then I had to weigh it up. There were new sacrifices that had to be made. If I was going to run these really long ultras, maybe I would have to give up the certainty of being able to run monthly marathons. And so eventually I decided that these aren't sacrifices that I'm willing to make. And so I have to release this desire of running these ultra marathons, of having all these badges. And the same is true for the lifestyle I chose to live. Like, I'm a digital nomad now. I've been traveling around Latin America for most of this year. But that meant giving up time with my family and relationships in Australia and the convenience of having one home. Those are prices that I was willing to pay to get this result, and so that makes sense. And so for me, this idea of either sacrificing for your desires or releasing them was a lesson that I knew the theory of, but I'd only really learnt it when I put it into practice, when I had to make these decisions and live out the consequences of these sacrifices and get the results or not. And while you can make all these sacrifices, there's no guarantee that you get the result. And that's the third thing that I learned, is that there's one thing that is guaranteed, and that's suffering. The only real variable is when. You either choose it now or you delay it into the future, and that decides how long the suffering lasts. If you choose to suffer now, you're actively making that decision. It's usually temporary. If you delay it into the future, that's passive suffering, and it usually lasts a lot longer. Another lesson that I'd heard Tom, Dick, and Harry all say, but I only learnt it once I'd actually lived it. Halfway through my PR marathon in December of 2025, I was in a lot of pain. It was summer in Australia. I was out in the sun. I was running laps around a grass track. I was depleted of energy. I was hot. I was tired. I just wanted to stop running. To give you a gauge of how much pain I was in, I would put myself in hospital 2 days later from the run. And I was constantly having to make the decision: are you going to suffer in the moment? Are you going to actively choose to suffer temporarily till the end of this run? Or are you going to stop? And then are you going to delay the suffering into the regret that you build that you weren't able to complete it, that you weren't able to give your all? Living out that lesson for the last hour of that marathon is a drastically different experience from just hearing someone talk about it and downloading it into your brain. Maybe what made it easier for me to choose suffering in the moment is that earlier in the year, I'd had to stop running for 2 months because I had an IT band injury. And I got to sit in the inaction and let the suffering be delayed into the future. And that sitting with that regret and that frustration of not having taken the action and suffered in the moment, it was way more painful overall. You know when you could have done more or when you should have done something and didn't. And that icky feeling that follows you around is so much worse than just the suffering is in the moment. I really think there's 2 mechanisms that are at work here that were true for all of my marathons, but I think they go universally beyond that to any kind of difficult challenge. And that is 1, resetting your baseline for what hard is. Everything is really just relative at this point. Once you've done something really hard, it's your new baseline that you can then compare other activities to. It makes it easier to chew and swallow these difficult tasks when you can compare them to something really difficult that you did. You can picture yourself in the 6th hour of a hot, uncomfortable marathon and go, oh, well, what I'm doing right now isn't that bad, and I got through that, so I can get through this. I think that's why Hell Week is so bad for these people that want to be special force guys, is that they know they're going to be faced with difficult things out in the field, and so they need to have this really difficult experience that they've gotten through to refer back to as their relative baseline. I mean, for me, running marathons was that difficult thing, and it made quitting my job to become a digital nomad a much easier decision. It made starting this channel a lot easier of a decision just because I'd done the difficult thing of running a marathon every month. The second mechanism here we kind of touched on, but it's the confidence to persevere. This ties into leading with action and the Bandura effect of self-efficacy, where doing is the strongest belief that you can give yourself. More than being encouraged, more than watching someone else do something, doing is the strongest piece of evidence that you can give yourself. And what I really think is on the other side of having this confidence that you can persevere through difficult tasks is that you're able to take on bigger risks. Most risks that you would consider taking have a possibility of a really high upside. And what's really happening when you're not taking that risk is you don't believe that you can execute on the required actions to get that result. You don't think your likelihood of achievement is high enough. But when you increase your confidence to persevere through difficult things, you give yourself more proof that you can increase that likelihood. And so it makes more sense to take more risks. And so you're more likely to get these big rewards just by taking more of these risks. It's certainly true for the risks and the outcomes that I've gotten since I started running marathons. The version of me before I started running marathons was capable of drastically less. I used to sit on decisions and let fear stop me, and now I lead with action and I live a way more fulfilling life. I used to guarantee my unhappiness by not being willing to sacrifice for the things that I was desiring. And now I can release those desires for anything that I'm not actively progressing towards. I used to complain about when I'd have to pay the debt of the suffering that I'd delayed into the future. And now I choose to suffer in the moment and live off the benefits of previous sacrifices and times of suffering in the past. I knew about all of these lessons before I started running marathons. But it was only when I consistently started doing difficult things that I actually learned the lessons that allowed me to design the life that I have now, where I'm realizing more of my potential and actualizing it into reality. And I've never been more happy or fulfilled or satisfied ever before in my life. So if realizing more of your potential and bringing more of it into reality is what you're about, then you're in the right place, and I'll see you in the next one, which is right here, because YouTube suggests a specific video that it thinks you're going to enjoy and is different for everyone. And this is the one it thinks it's right for you. So give it a go.